Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the MMA Archive. It's a pleasure to be here once again, back at it with another great event to cover. So, it's only right. We got to get right into this, man. No holding back. So, this is UFC 11, The Proving Ground. The poster for this one's really dope. It's Tank Abbott. It looks all grade scaled. It looks pretty cool. September 20th, 1996, in what is now known as the James Brown Arena in Augusta, Georgia, US of A, of course. 4,500 were in attendance this night, and our TV announcing crew is Bruce Beck, Jeff Blatnick, and Don Wilson. Our ring announcer for tonight, Rich Goins. The G-Man is back, repeating last names as always, and let's get right into it. As you know, with these alternate bouts, they never have the footage for me, so unfortunately, just got to sort of run through them. It was Scott Ferrozzo versus Sam Fulton. Scott Ferrozzo made his UFC debut at UFC 8, losing to Jerry Bolander by guillotine choke. This is Sam Fulton making his UFC debut. Scott Ferrozzo ended up winning via submission due to strikes at 1 minute and 45 seconds, moving on to 1-1 in the UFC. Unfortunately, once again, no footage available. So we'll move right on. Next up, Roberto Traven coming up against Dave Barry, both men making their UFC debut. Roberto Traven ended up winning via submission due to strikes at 1 minute 23 seconds, moving on to 1-0 in the UFC. I didn't get to see this one until the end when there was a little bit of extra time, so they actually showed it. It looked like he had him in back mount, about to like try to set up a choke, a rear naked choke, of course. And Dave Barry just tapped out, so it makes sense, you know. Um, didn't want to withstand the position, didn't want to wait it out to see what would happen, just sort of tapped out, and you got to respect it, man. He was feeling some heat definitely while Roberto was throwing some punches from that back mount position. And when you're stuck in that spot and you're eating shots, I don't blame anybody for tapping out. That's a really tough spot to be in. So let's get right into the quarterfinals. We got Mark Coleman, UFC 10 champ, coming back to defend his title, standing at 6'1", 250 pounds, coming up against Julian Sanchez, who is 6'3", 300 pounds. Coleman is 3-0 in the UFC, while Julian Sanchez is making his UFC debut. Julian came in and left. He made a bold move. I will admit, Emmanuel Yarborough came out here. He was 600 plus. He came out here shirtless. My boy Julian, he looking like me in the pool. He got the black shirt on, trying to contain it all. I respect it. I feel you, bro. I wanted to make that clear. I feel you, bro. But it was just pretty funny to see him come out and not take his shirt off, go straight into the cage with it. Um, Julian ended up coming out in orthodox. Coleman also in orthodox, which I was surprised by. Obviously, he was starting the last event in southpaw. Um, Julian landed a nice jab and sort of retreats back. Um, and then you see once again Sanchez, he skips into range, and Coleman single legs him straight into side control. Just a beast. He almost fell over because of his landing on his belly, but he was able to maintain that top position inside control. Immediately postures up and lands some big right hands, sort of slapping right hands, but either way, connecting flush that got Sanchez to cover up. Coleman decides to attack attack a choke from side control, and after a slight adjustment where he moved his arm up to create that nice little triangle from scarf hold, he ends up getting the tap at 45 seconds with the scarf hold choke. This is the second one we've seen in the UFC. Fastest one we've seen. Just dominant performance by Coleman. It was really cool to see him get that submission too, you know, working all angles of his game because he was known for being just the king of ground and pound. But no, he's got some submissions up his sleeve too. So that was dope. Once again, coming on top as the winner. And we can move right on to the second quarterfinal bout. So Reza Nasri, who's standing at 5'11", 205, coming up against Brian Johnston, who is 6'4", 235. Brian Johnson 1-1 in the UFC, with his last fight being a loss to Don Fry at UFC 10. No shame in that. Fry went on to fight in the finals. Brian trained by the OG, Javier Mendez from AKA, also, famous for being Khabib's trainer, as well as, Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier. The list goes on and on. What a OG. He looked real young, real svelte in this one. So I was like, damn, Javier Mendez has been doing the damn thing for a while. Reza's making his UFC debut. Both guys start off in orthodox. You could tell Nasri's a little jittery, a little nervous. He ends up rushing towards Brian, shoots for a single leg, and Brian pulls his hip back really nicely. We've seen him do this multiple times now, and grabs a hold of Nasri's neck and knees him right to the head. One of the most flush knees in the UFC so far, to be honest. Um, Nasri grabs double underhooks, trying to go as desperately he can to try to get a takedown. Brian grabs a nice overhook, steps to the side, and spins around, taking Nasri down straight into side control. This was a huge display of athleticism. You're not supposed to be able to literally spin and fling someone off their feet like a top, and that's exactly what Brian did. This guy is strong. You could definitely tell, and really good situational awareness to know that when he did that, because he had double unders, he sort of has to follow him. He's connected to him. So when he did that spin, it was crazy. I couldn't believe it. There was no trip, no sort of takedown attempt besides that. He just spun him around and landed right in that side control. So Brian ends up wrapping the head and lands some big right hands. And as he sort of landing those shots, he uses his advantage to circle right into full mount. And I'm like, damn, Brian's finishing instincts is something to behold, because he's quick, like he's very fast, cat-like almost, in the way that he sort of sees that he has him rocked and then goes straight into the next position, secures the position, and then starts landing shots. He landed some brutal headbutts, two of them, and then just postured up, landed three hard right hands that you could tell Nasri was almost out. And Don Wilson mentioned, I thought it was pretty funny. He was like, those shots can't put you out because you're on the ground. Just this weekend, Shavkat Rakhmonov proved him entirely wrong about that. You could definitely land enough power to put somebody out, even if you're on the ground with them. But once again, just an amazing bounce back performance for Brian Johnston, getting the TKO at 28 seconds. Big John dove in to stop the fight. And I thought this was pretty funny. He damaged Johnston's nose. Like, you see it. He sort of shoves him off and they land on the ground together. And Johnston was pissed. He was like really fired up after that. And I didn't really understand why. Excuse me. Got the sneezes. Sorry about that. Um, but you could tell Johnson was pissed off. I didn't get it at first. I thought he was like just riled up after getting the win, but he was just mad. He was pissed that he got injured, because you could see blood trickling out of that nose. But interesting to note for the next fight, because obviously he's moving on to the next round. So got to keep that in mind for the next one. But next up in the quarterfinals, we got David Tank Abbott standing at 6 foot, 298 pounds versus Sam Adkins, 6'3", 260 pounds. Tank Abbott is 3-2 in the UFC, returning after a suspension from a brawl that almost broke out at UFC 8 in Puerto Rico. Tank apparently made some threats to a woman who was upset because Tank's wife was instigating him to sort of start that brawl with someone he had history with in the training room. Turns out the woman who got upset about the instigation was Big John's wife. And apparently Tank threatened to kill her, which obviously on brand for a guy like Tank. Shocking shit, honestly. And Big John was pissed when he found out. He asked the UFC that Tank would never be allowed back, and if he would, that he didn't want to ref anymore. And that's a big spot because obviously this is their only referee up to this point. He's the only person that's refereed throughout all these events. So in a bind, the UFC was like, you know what? Let's suspend Tank Abbott, make him write an apology to Big John and his wife. Thankfully, they accepted, and now we're here. Wild story. This was crazy to research because I was like, why was he suspended? Like, it was never mentioned on the broadcast or anything like that why Tank Abbott was suspended, but he's back and ready to go against Sam Atkins, who is 2-1 with his last UFC fight coming just a UFC 10. Known for being sort of an alternate fighter, respect. His only loss coming, I think, to Don Fry. But both guys come out in this one in orthodox. Atkins opens up with a slick 1-2, but it just misses, just misses. And funny enough, I wrote it this way because it's important to mention. Tank didn't even shoot for a takedown. He just rushed him. And when he did, Atkins fell over and um, Tank Abbott just lands right inside control, right up against the fence. And I wrote, this is dangerous in all caps because we've seen Tank do some brutal shit up against this fence. So I'm watching this with bated breath, like, well, what's about to happen? Tank ends up doing his patented thing, grabbing the fence and hammering away with big left hands. You can see they're definitely hurting Atkins. It gets a big reaction out of him. He's covering up. And then Tank decides to put his left forearm, right across Atkins' neck. Starts landing some big shots to the body, and then he looks down, and you see him look down at Atkins and realize, I could choke him like this. Like at first, he was just trying to hold him and post him there so he could land some big shots. He looks down and he's like, you know what? I got him. Let me just keep it going. He really starts to put his weight on Atkins' neck and uses the fence to torque it even more. He's pulling on the fence with both hands, pulling himself into Sam Atkins' neck. And Sam Atkins is forced to tap at 2 minutes and 6 seconds to that forearm choke. This was really cool. There was a modern day example of this. I'm trying to remember his name. Um, Alexander Romanov, UFC heavyweight. He got a very similar submission where he was out in space. Obviously, you don't use the fence nowadays, but he got a very similar forearm choke right across the chin, put all that weight on it. So it was pretty cool to see someone get it back in the day. This is the second time Tank Abbott's really used that fence to his advantage, which is pretty cool, man. Once again, if it's legal, find your way around it to use whatever's in the rules to help you. It makes sense to do it. And respect for Tank Abbott for figuring out that he can do that. Um, Little funny side note, I noticed after the fight, I didn't even notice before the fight, but guess who's in Tank Abbott's corner? You never would guess it. Tito Ortiz. Tito Ortiz, known recently for being on the Huntington Beach Congress, which is ridiculous. I don't understand how he was voted in. But Tito Ortiz right there, front and center with Tank Abbott. So something to come. We'll definitely see Tito Ortiz in the UFC sooner than later. But next up, our final quarterfinal bout. Fabio Gargel, standing at 6 foot, 200 pounds, versus Jerry Bolander, standing at 5'11, 200 pounds as well. Fabio's making his UFC debut, while Jerry is 1-1 in the UFC, with his last fight coming at UFC 8 in a loss to Gary Goodridge. No shame in that at all. Obviously, Gary Goodridge is a monster and has proven that multiple times in the UFC. So this one gets started right away. Both men come out in orthodox. Fabio feinting that Gracie stomp, trying to get a reaction out of Jerry so he could duck under to the legs. Finally, he rushes Jerry straight up to the fence, grabs a body lock. Jerry Bolander, I got to give it to him. He used the fence very, very well to sort of keep himself upright. He's standing on one leg, balancing on the fence and holding on, just trying to see the right opportunity to counter. And he ends up locking up that whizzer, which is when you get a deep overhook and sort of leverage it whenever they're trying to take you down on that side angle. You try to hold on and use all your weight to that whizzer so that you could keep yourself like parallel to your opponent. So even if they do get you down, you're both on your knees, so you could sort of scramble back up. It's not a takedown. That's important to mention because that's exactly what happens. They end up in that little scramble, and Jerry Bolander is able to take top position on Fabio, even though Fabio was the one attacking the takedown, which I just thought was beautiful. Great situational awareness there, in a spot that not a lot of guys were comfortable in back in the day, from those sort of side body lock takedowns. Fabio does a great job of maintaining his full guard, holding Jerry in place. Finally, Jerry is able to separate, land some big right hands on the break, and then he ends up kicking him twice to the legs as Fabio's still on the ground. We see this often now, but he gets a warning because Jerry Bolander, that is, has shoes on. So once again, I mention this all the time. If you're wearing shoes at this point in the UFC, you're not supposed to be throwing kicks at all. So it was funny. They like gave him a warning and let the judges know, like if he does it again, we got to take a point, which I thought was pretty interesting. I wonder how that would have went back then, because the commentary mentioned, they would fine him, not like a point, because I don't think they were using the 10-point must system at this time. Whenever they render the decisions, is just the name of the person. So interesting. I kind of want to see how that would happen or play out, where someone's docked a point in one of these old school fights, to see what happens. Might just be a fine, who knows? But I thought that was of note. Um, when they get back to the feet, Jerry opens up with a nice body kick, and Fabio counters beautifully. This was the best shot of the night so far on the feet, if you ask me. He lands a beautiful straight right that you could tell stuns Jerry Bolander. He landed it right to the forehead and opened up a cut, that ends up playing a part of the fight a little bit later on. Really, really good counter, which is so funny because you still see this counter so often today as people are trying to punish their opponents with those calf kicks. Guys are, you got to be keen to it. That's one of the best ways to counter that kick or defend it, even, is, you throw right back and sort of get them to think, I'm not going to throw that next time, because he's probably going to counter me if I try to. But they end up in a clinch, and Jerry's working the body with some nice knees, some nice uppercuts to the ribs. Fabio tries to back him up to the fence, and then is able to get a nice takedown as Jerry sort of throws himself back to attack that same guillotine that he ended up submitting Scott Ferrozzo with at UFC 8. He grabs a hold of the neck, but he doesn't have enough leverage. You can see Fabio does a good job of freeing his head, and then eventually freeing his legs, and then going from full guard straight into full mount. But this was pretty cool. This is a nice little scramble, because as soon as he sits in full mount, Jerry bucks up with everything he has and ends up reversing the position, getting top position again in Fabio's guard, which I was like, man, this guy's agile, like that's a nice moment. They always teach you that in jits, whenever someone's trying to advance position, you could feel the point in which they're not really stable. And that's when you explode. You can't let them stabilize themselves, because as soon as they do, then you're stuck in that position. So great job by Bolander to sort of seize that opportunity and end up on the top position. Jerry starts landing. Well, he stays heavy in the full guard. This is important to note, because he's not given any space to allow Fabio to attack submissions. He's known for being a jiu-jitsu guy. And he starts landing some big right hands to the ribs, just working the body, landing whatever shots are open for him. Fabio's able to get some feet on Jerry's hips after being controlled for like 5 minutes, and then eventually kicks off. Jerry tries to drive into the guard again. Fabio briefly had him in a triangle choke, but Jerry was able to shuck it off and end up right in Fabio's guard once again. He almost maintained back position too, but Fabio did a good job of turning and facing. So there was a lot of scrambles in this fight, which I really enjoyed. Both guys technical on the ground. Fabio keeps trying to elevate Jerry Bolander. Jerry does a good job to stay heavy. land some shots and prevent him from, reversing position. And eventually the bell sounds and it goes to the judges. All three scored it unanimously for Jerry Bolander, even though, in my opinion, Fabio landed the bigger shot on the feet. Obviously, the accumulation of ground strikes is what won it for Jerry Bolander. And obviously, it comes at 15 minutes because these were one straight round, 15 minutes straight. So really a freaking a marathon of a fight that all these guys are subject to. I hope you guys could hear that. We got a we got a car outside just blasting reggaeton right now. But anyway, on to the next one, into the semifinals. We got Mark Coleman, 6'1", 250, going up against Brian Johnston, 6'4", 235. Both the most athletic guys in this competition, if you ask me, just based on looks and the things they do in the cage. You could tell these guys are jacked, like both of them. So I was really excited that they got matched up. They gave us really good semifinal matches here. So both men come out in orthodox. Brian has a very, very low stance. You see, he's conscious. He's got to defend those takedowns. He already knows. And that's key. He does a good job of doing exactly what Mark Coleman was doing in the last UFCs, circling away and trying to pull Coleman into him. And every time Coleman got close enough that you could try to land some offense, Brian Johnston's landing a nice straight right and then circling right back off, keeping him at distance, forcing him to pull into him so he could land strikes. Eventually, Brian, with that same philosophy, pulls him in, lands a hard low kick to the leg that you could see, it's forcing him, Mark Coleman, that is, to pressure, to try to take those strikes away. And Johnston's just circling away, staying persistent, and landing, whatever strike he sees is available to him that won't get him in too much trouble. So he landed another big leg kick, and at this point, you could see a welt on Mark Coleman's leg. Like these are hurting, and he needs to address them. At one point, he sort of takes that patented step back where you see where a guy is really hurt from leg kicks that they sort of switch stances real quick. He ends up doing that, and the commentators noted too, like Mark Coleman's hurting from those leg kicks. And I don't know if you heard him or not or whatever, but Johnston feels it too, and he's like, you know what, I'm gonna keep throwing it, and he gets a little overzealous, throws a big leg kick, and Coleman grabs that leg and shoots in for a nice, well-timed takedown and gets it. Brian does a good job of scrambling, trying to roll through the takedown to sort of get Mark Coleman off of him, but Coleman is able to do a good job staying on top and ending up in half guard. Um, there's a little struggle, obviously, here on the ground. Brian's doing a good job of keeping his head directly underneath Coleman's chin, which is important when someone's trying to land strikes in that top position because they don't have a target. Even if they're posturing up, if you're keeping their head in their chest, they can only hit you to the sides of the head. Obviously, that hurts. Don't get me wrong. But especially in today's UFC, that technically is illegal. So you got to be careful when you're hitting a guy in the back of the head. So it's a smart strategy to sort of play possum, put yourself in a position where they can't really hit you. Um, and Coleman ends up flattening him out, sort of pushing his forearm on his head and lands some big strikes behind the ear while he can, just peppering him wherever he can. Finally, he pressures him and puts him up against the fence, is able to start landing some big swiping left hands. You could hear the thudding, cracking Brian. And eventually, Brian sort of turns over away from Mark Coleman. And as soon as he does that, Big John jumps in and stops the fight at 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Mark Coleman gets another TKO victory due to ground and pound, this time from half guard. Just a great performance, man. He faced adversity early on. He couldn't get anything going. Brian Johnston is doing a good job of, keeping him at bay, landing strikes, and Coleman persevered, man. As soon as he got to his position, he took advantage and got him out of there. So much respect. I would say this was, even though obviously he had a hard, tough fight with Don Fry, I feel like this was the moment where we see, this guy could face some adversity earlier and he's not going to fold. Like he's going to stay persistent and keep attacking his advantage. So great performance by Mark Coleman, if you ask me. So next up, our second and final semifinal bout between David Tank Abbott and Scott Ferrozzo. Once again, Tank Abbott is 6 foot 289. Scott Ferrozzo 5'10, 350 pounds. I know you're probably wondering, where's Jerry Bolander? Didn't he win? Yes. Unfortunately, he had to pull out due to an injury, which made the room for Scott Ferrozzo, the alternate, to come into the tournament. These are two big, thick boys. I'm telling you right now. It's almost, yeah, definitely 600 pounds between the two of them. This shit was crazy. I'm not gonna lie. This fight, if you ask me, and I'm gonna say this before we even get into it, I think this was the. Hope this isn't controversial, but I think this was the best fight ever in the UFC up to this point, which is pretty funny because you're looking across at these guys and they don't look like the best athletes. But even fights like Don Fry, Mark Coleman, or Severn, Ken Shamrock, these fights didn't have the same kind of um, constant action, constant toe to toe striking that this one did. So crazy, crazy fight, man. Both of these guys walk right up to the center. Scott leads with a jab that misses, and Tank cracks him with a big straight right hand. They both end up standing toe to toe and just start swinging. Eventually, they end up in a clinch, sort of against the fence, and they separate and just flurry again. This was crazy. I can't even tell you, what landed or what, because both these guys are landing shots, big shots, and they're just taking them and coming forward, which makes for a fun fight always. Tank shoots for a takedown, and Scott counters it beautifully by sort of shucking him off the same way Brian Johnson does, almost looking for that hip throw. But Tank ends up getting it back, getting to Scott Ferrozzo's back, but standing up, pushes him up against the fence. They show Scott's face, and you see he has a big cut over his right eye from one of those flurries. Um, and as he's being held up against the fence, Scott starts landing some good punches and some big knees. Obviously he's being pushed up against the fence and he's stuck there, but he does a great job of working from that position. He ends up landing, three big knees, two right up the center to Tank's gut, and then the third, as Tank sort of starts dropping down, lands right to Tank Abbott's chin. Like when I saw it, I had to rewind it to make sure that I was seeing it correctly because that landed so flush. Like I feel like most people get hit with that shot and get knocked out. Like I'm very surprised that Tank was able to eat that, because once again, this is a huge dude. Of course, he's up against the fence, so he can't make too much um, torque with it. But just crazy to see it land that flush and basically not do anything. Crazy, wild, wild shot there. Tank ends up separating off of that and lands a nice uppercut. But Scott counters him with a big hook that you could tell buzzes Tank Abbott. Um, Crazy. And then Scott continues to land those big knees to the body, and you could see Tank literally grabbing his belly. And at this point, Tank is up against the fence now, so he's in prime position for Scott to keep landing these strikes. But because of the cut that Scott has, Big John separates them, and I'm like, no, because from that position, Scott was working, and he could have did a lot more damage. You could tell at this point, Tank is already fatigued, which is funny because both of these guys are huge, as I mentioned before. So I was surprised to see Scott had a lot more wind than Tank Abbott did, even though he was the bigger fighter. So as always, instead of giving him back the position, they start it from the corners again, and I'm annoyed. I'm like, damn, he lost his good position, and now Tank's probably gonna try to wear him out against the fence again. But as soon as they start, They just walk right towards each other, right in the middle of the cage, and Tank just surges forward with big combination. Scott meets him with some nice punches. Finally, a leg kick that you could tell really like got Tank to think a little bit, because Tank was just rushing forward, throwing combinations. They weren't landing because Scott was retreating, but a lot of mustard on him. You know, he definitely was pushing the pressure and trying to land a big shot to sort of answer back for what just happened before the separation. Finally, Tank does what he did earlier, sort of pushes him up against the fence. Scott keeps landing knees to the groin that literally lift Tank off the ground. Like you could see, trying to avoid as much impact as possible. He's like jumping up with them, but he doesn't back off. He's holding him up against the fence and sort of trying to grind him out. But Scott's not having any of it, man. He's staying busy however he can, landing punches to the back of the Tank's head, knees to the body, knees to the groin. Once again, just trying to land wherever he can. Finally, Big John separates them for lack of action. And once again, Tank is coming forward. He lands a huge left hook that I thought, once again, most people that get hit with that are going down. And Scott stands his ground, lands a massive uppercut that rocks Tank Abbott again. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, this fight is crazy. Like, both these guys landed big shots that I feel like other people would not be able to stand up to at all. But eventually, Scott just capitalizes on that momentum, lands another big uppercut. But as he's sort of surging forward, Tank does a good job of, as soon as his back hits the fence, popping off of it and using that momentum to reverse and put Scott up against the fence once again. So they end up trading shots to the body, like Takayama, just there banging each other out to the body until the regulation period ends and we are heading to a 3-minute overtime period. For some reason, Big John, oh, it makes sense to me now because he screamed 1 minute. You got 1 minute. And I thought that meant that the overtime was 1 minute, but what he meant was you got 1 minute of rest and then the 3-minute overtime period. So that makes sense. You gotta piece things together, you know. So as soon as the fight commences again in overtime, Scott lands a nice jab. You could tell he's trying to stay on the outside, stay disciplined, not sort of rush forward, because he feels at this point, you know, he's in the driver's seat. He's winning so far. Take Tank lands at the same exact time of that jab, a beautiful left hook that you could see. Scott's head goes all the way across, like it landed flush, and he follows up with two overhand rights, all of them landing flush, and Scott just eats him. And he's looking for his counters, looking for that uppercut, but he misses just by a hair. And I'm like, what are these dudes made of? Like, these dudes are just taking everything that comes their way. Um, Scott ends up landing a real thudding leg kick that Tank ends up countering with the straight right, sort of calling to that Jerry Bolander fight from earlier. Finally, Scott lands two nice jabs in combination that forces Tank to sort of rush him to the fence again. And as soon as he does, Scott lands a slick uppercut that you could literally lifts his head again. And I'm like, dude, how? How has he not been at least knocked down by these strikes? Like it's this fight has been so fun, dude. So fun. Um, as he's being held up against the fence again, he landed a beautiful sort of, he looking at him and lands a beautiful up elbow as he's sort of just being held there against the fence. Um, Scott keeps punishing him, you know, knees to the groin, punches to the back of the head, wherever he could find that opening, as Tank is just holding on for dear life, trying to, you know, waste as much clock as possible. I don't know if he thought that he was winning doing that. I don't think so. More so like a survival tactic, in my opinion. Finally, Big John separates them with about 20 seconds left. They return to the center again, and these dudes did the good old Max Holloway, Ricardo Lamas. Like they're just like, we're not going anywhere. No more movement. We're just throwing bombs. So they stood there toe to toe, just threw bombs at each other. Scott lands a beautiful left hook, almost drops Tank. Like you see, he stumbles and like needs to regain his footing. He just comes forward after that, just pissed him off, and just exchanged big shots with Scott over and over again until the bell rang. This was a great fight, man. A great way to end the fight as well. Obviously, there was some moments that were a little slow, with Tank sort of holding on, but even those, there was still a lot of palpable danger because Scott wasn't stopping. He was trying to land as much shots as possible, and his cardio for someone that large, like this man, he's holding it down for us thick boys. You know what I'm saying? He's giving us a good name, showing that it ain't all show no go. My guy has some go in him. But this has led for what should be a great final. But unfortunately, as always with this tournament model, something comes up and Scott's not able to continue because he was injured. Obviously, that cut over his right eye, as well as just general fatigue from going to war with this guy for 18 minutes straight. They turn to the other alternate, Roberto Traven, and find out that he broke his hand. So, for the first time in UFC history, Mark Coleman ends up winning the UFC tournament by default. I don't know why. Maybe they should have turned to Tank. Maybe they should have turned to another fighter that lost earlier in the evening, who made it further along just to see who was available. But after checking on both the alternates, they just decided, you know what? That's it. We don't got anybody else to fight. Mark Coleman, this one's yours. And we'll see you again at the Ultimate 2. So we got another big tournament coming up, man, where they get all the best guys from the last couple tournaments and put them all together and see who's gonna rise to the top. So I'm really excited about that one. They already talked about in the interview how Mark Coleman and Don Fry are going to be in it again. So there's a chance to see that rematch of a fight, which obviously was awesome. This event was really fun. It was fast and furious. Obviously, there was a couple decisions, but even those fights were fun. This one was really good, and it really hurt that we couldn't get a proper final bout. But can't complain too much with the way everything else played out. So now it's time to name our awards for the night. Uh, you got to give Fight of the Night. Got to give Fight of the Night to Tank Abbott versus Scott Ferrozzo. Let me write this out real quick. David Tank Abbott versus Scott Ferrozzo. Just a great fight, man. Back and forth, insane action. Both of these guys landing shots that nobody else would have been able to take, like nobody else. Much respect. You got to give it to him. My performance of the night goes to Mark Coleman against. You ready? Brian Johnston. This was a great fight. I thought Johnston came in with the right game plan, trying to keep him at bay, trying to do whatever he can to sort of keep him at distance and make him fight against his strengths. But Mark Coleman's too tenacious, too strong, and was able to finally find his way inside and get the TKO. So great performance. Got to give it to Mark Coleman there. Our KO of the night. Which one should I go with here? There's a lot of good ones. I think I'm gonna go with Brian Johnston against let me make sure I get the name right. Reza Nasri versus Reza Nasri. Just a great series of strikes to end it off. Really, really fun fight. And once again, just showed, Brian Johnson deserved that spot against Mark Coleman. And he showed up and did well against the two. So you can't hate on the guy at all. Finally, our submission of the night. It's only right. Mark Coleman's in it again, baby. Mark Coleman versus, let me get the name right once again, Julian Sanchez. Just a beautiful scarf hold choke. I mentioned it earlier, second one we've seen so far here in the UFC. And worthwhile. Like, this event was super fun. I loved watching it. and really made me excited for the next one because, like I said, there's a lot of guys that are infamous that we know bring it and come to fight every time they do. And they're all going to be going up against each other in that next tournament. So looking forward to it. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, sticking with me this entire time. Please check out UFC 11. It was super fun once again. But you could catch me at Negron MMA on Twitter, as well as Chris Negron _ on Instagram for all of your MMA/sports generally needs. Also, make sure that you follow OTS Media as well as OTS Media Co. on YouTube. We've got so much content, so many different sports, so many different, lifestyle, news updates, like everything you need, we've got at OTS. And now you hear my cat, that means it's time to go. There's so much going on right now in this house. So sorry about that, you guys. But thank you once again for sticking with me. I hope you guys have a good one. Peace.